Whether it be enjoying the benefits of having the option to play just about any game you could possibly think of, or you just have a good old-fashioned clutter fetish, collecting video games could sure be a heck of a mess of fun, but if you ask me, it's just not as fun as it used to be. So sit back in your Step Pepper's lawn chair and allow me, YouTube's tallest man, CameronAllOneWord, to tell you why.
Cameron, all one word. Cameron, there's danger. And no one never fails once he's involved. Somehow, whatever's wrong gets solved. Cameron, all one word. Cameron, there's danger. Oh no, it never fails. He'll take the clues and find the where's and why's and who's. Cameron, all one word. Cameron, there's danger. Cameron.
Okay, so I'm sure some of you are probably thinking there's going to be some kind of a rant about how digital is superior to physical, but even though I don't really care for collecting games myself all that much anymore, at least not as much as I used to anyway, I'll still buy physical until they pry the option away from my cold dead hands. Now, does it make sense for me to word it in that way? Of course not, but I'll always prefer buying a physical copy and then ideally selling it after beating it so I could make about 3/4 of my money back, or sometimes even profiting a little bit if the game comes with some kind of a pre-order bonus that I could sell on top of it. Why the frig am I even selling all these games in the first place when I used to keep just about everything even after 100%ing it? I mean, I used to buy just about every game that ever come out if I thought there was any remote chance that I'd ever end up getting to play it at some point in my life, which would explain this backlog of unopened games that only went down in value since I bought them. But the reason why I just don't care anymore has got nothing to do with money, because as much money as I spent on my current collection, the values actually went up a pretty significant amount over time, whereas the value of the dollar's only gone down. Man, this isn't a modern game, but I felt like a total geek when I bought Little Samson for $900 in 2015, but I ended up selling it 2 years later for $1,200, so basically somebody paid me $300 minus the fees to borrow it for 2 years. I mean, there's really no reason to feel bad about spending money on games if you like them, at least as long as you plan on holding on to them for a little bit anyway. Despite game collecting being a pretty decent hedge against inflation, though, I just don't truly feel like physical copies are as valuable as they used to be anymore. Like, I'm sure there's a fair amount of modern games that are gonna end up being worth a pretty penny someday, particularly with the special editions and all that, but to me, the appeal of collecting was never really about money or anything like that, although that was a nice perk to try to convince myself that it wasn't wasting money. All I'm saying is that I just don't get the same satisfaction owning a disc or cartridge knowing that the full games aren't even on there, given that modern software has always got countless patches and updates, even on the day it comes out. And hell, sometimes the games aren't even on the physical media at all. You just buy a physical copy with a digital download. Who thought that was a good idea? Then again, nobody besides me and like 5 other people ever speak up about it, so I guess I blame everybody who's accepting it more so than the publishers who are treating us how we're allowing them to. You might say I'm to blame too, since I'm still buying these half-assed physical releases as well, but if publishers would try a little bit harder, then maybe I'd keep some of these games rather than sell them to get money that the developers are never gonna see. I totally get that it's a good thing that modern technology even allows for imperfections in games to be fixed after release in the first place, and that not all developers are releasing unfinished, buggy games on purpose, but I still think way too many developers are abusing the power of the internet. I know this might sound crazy to some of you, but it wasn't all that long ago when publishers didn't send video games out for mass production until they were, finished. Sure, there are always glitches that manage to slip through the cracks for even the best games of all time, but it was never anything that ruined the experience, aside from the games that had no chance of being fun in the first place. In a way, I actually kind of love glitches and accept them as a part of history for a lot of games. Hell, they don't even bother to fix them in re-releases most of the time because fans will usually riot in the streets over it, so if you own a copy of Mega Man on the NES, then you own the complete definitive version of that game, which feels a lot nicer than owning a disc that's essentially got an unfinished beta version on it. If the internet was around back in the 80s the same way we know it today, then all these older cartridges would probably be complete messes since there'd be no way to update these past consoles anymore. Well, at least not without hacking anyway. But at that point, you might as well just emulate, which I'm not against people doing, but it does kind of kill some of the charm in my opinion. Sometimes developers did release updated versions on future cartridges, but even then it kind of made it more fun to collect, and oddly enough, sometimes the versions with the glitches on them are actually the ones the communities decided were more valuable. Hell, to this day, Smash Melee fans are still fighting over which region had the best version, the updated PAL version with nerfed characters, or the dirty NTSC version that's more widely accepted in tournaments. Even beyond patches and updates, most high-profile games usually have DLC that'll be unattainable if you find a copy in a post-apocalyptic world, which makes hoarding all these discs and cartridges a little less fulfilling in my opinion. Obviously, DLC made gaming better as a whole, despite some developers abusing the hell out of it from time to time, but still though, it does make physical media less definitive in the long run, and another thing that kills the fun of collecting for me is the fact that just about every game that comes out gets re-released like 37 times in like 5 years. You think you're some kind of a big shot buying a game on day one, only for the multiplat release to come with all the DLC and updates on another console. And then before you know it, there's the super ultra mega definitive we mean at this time version, making that copy you got on day one, well, an obsolete turd. The worst kind of turds. I mean, bless your heart if you're a collector of Xbox 360 or PS3 games, but personally, I just couldn't imagine being psyched on a wall full of outdated games, half of which are a mess without their updates. First, I was actually pretty excited to collect for the Switch, but with cartridges over 8GB being considerably more expensive than Blu-rays, most publishers cheaped out and require you to download most of their games, and like I said earlier, some even sell physical boxes with download codes, so, like, if only half of the physicals are actually on there, then what's the friggin' point, you know? Especially since most games have patches these days anyway. I know Switch collecting's real popular these days, and hey, if you get a thrill out of it, then more power to you, but to me, the most recent console I feel like collecting for is the 3DS. I know there's a few patches here and there, but aside from a game-breaking glitch in Persona Q, nothing too crazy in my opinion. And even then, this problem's pretty rare, so I guess I just got unlucky. Rare patches aside though, I don't care what anybody says to me, there's never gonna be a better way to play 3DS games than on an actual 3DS, cause I'm sorry, having a split screen on your phone or using a mouse as a stylus is just plain friggin' barbaric. I know 3DSs are easy to hack so you can play the entire library for free. I'm reminded in the comments every day after all. But what can I say, I just think there's a little bit more charm in owning physicals. The Wii U's got a handful of games that'll never be as fun without the gamepad, but for the most part, the console's just not that fun to collect for in my opinion, seeing as how Nintendo ported most of the notable games over to the Switch with extra content on top of that. But then again, I don't really blame them, since they did actually want people to play these games after they worked so hard on them.
But that doesn't even count! I opened a box of shit!
Still though, I will admit it was a wiener move of them to sell Tropical Freeze for $10 extra after all they did was add an easy mode. I don't fully blame any one thing for why collecting isn't as fun anymore, though. On one hand, I get that the internet has a lot of benefits that could save developers a lot of money, but on the other hand, I do think they'd make way more money if people actually had more of a reason to keep their physicals. But then again, I'm sure there aren't that many people out there with the same mindset as me, so whatever, I guess. Maybe one reason why modern collectors are as passionate as they are is because they think that physical media is going to disappear at some point in the future, but if it does, then I think companies would be leaving a lot of money on the table. Like, obviously it'd be nice for them to not have to worry about paying to produce copies of games, not to mention not having to worry about making too many of them and having boxes of unsold copies in Frank's apartment, or not having enough copies of a popular game and then not having more copies ready till the hype died down. But honestly, I really do think there's a way for physical media to thrive for many more years, in a way that collectors could keep their hobby while publishers could still make money. The game that made me realize this was Sonic Mania Plus. When the game first came out, a lot of people were pissed that it didn't get a physical copy, despite there actually being a physical release, but eventually the game did get a physical copy with all the DLC added in, I'd imagine all the patches and all that too. So if you own a physical copy of Sonic Mania Plus, then you have the full definitive version that'll give you the exact same experience in a post-apocalyptic world as it would in the slightly less apocalyptic world we live in now that is the internet. There's a lot of indie games that did the same thing, but this cartridge right here feels just as satisfying to own as any physical game that came out before patches and updates were a thing, so, like, maybe physicals shouldn't be made until the games already had all their final updates and DLC and all that. And don't get me wrong, I'm not gonna just buy a digital copy and then buy it again later on, because even with Sonic Mania Plus, this felt like a bit of a scam in my opinion, but if the entire industry moves towards a Game Pass type of a service, where you pay a monthly subscription fee and then just kinda get everything, then maybe this is actually better for collecting and preservation. I'm sure we're still a really long way off from all new games being released on subscription services, but to me, this way I wouldn't feel ripped off from buying the same game twice, and the physical media would be way better for preservation with the full definitive version and all the updates and extra content being on the disc or cartridge. Obviously, if everything were a subscription service someday, then there wouldn't be a media drive anymore, but they could always release an add-on to consoles that could play physical media with like a USB drive or something. Digital-only people probably think I sound pretty dumb right now because they think collecting's super niche, but just look at all the people who buy Stranger Things and The Mandalorian on Blu-ray. Hell, they still even make vinyls and record players, and people still buy them despite living in a world where pretty much every song in existence is on the internet for free. Sure, this method would probably only result in the most popular games getting physicals, but there's already tons of shovelware and even hidden gems that you can only get digitally as it is anyway, so honestly, I kinda think this is the best happy medium for collectors and publishers in a digital feature where it'd be a win-win for everybody. I'm sure there's probably a few physical collectors out there whose immediate reaction to this would be to punch me in the butt next time you see me out in public, but at least this way we'd get to keep physical media in a way that's a hell of a lot more definitive and satisfying than what we've got today, seeing as how the full versions of these games would actually be on the disc or cartridges, plus publishers would even be able to make a little extra money without being hurt by the used games market. That is, of course, if subscription services really take off someday anyway, but until then, I'm probably going to keep buying physicals and then selling most of them after I'm done with them, since they're not really going to be playable in their true forms when I'm replaying everything as a 98-year-old. Unless I remember to update all these games before my consoles go obsolete anyway, but I don't know, I kind of don't feel like doing that. I don't know, maybe I'm just a bad person for cutting my collection off of the 3DS, but that's all for today though. Let me know what you think about modern collecting and its future, and if you like this video then you should check out my video where I rank the entire Smash Ultimate roster from good to evil, but if you'll excuse me now, I gotta go water my snake. Later!